All right, and we are now live. Thank you so much for being here today. For class, I'm really looking forward to this discussion. Normally what we do in the classroom environment is that we have a panel that we invite. But since you're taking this class online, we're bringing the panel to you. So I've invited 3 of my friends. And really the conversation is on human resources, of working in a church, working in a nonprofit, of how do you work with your people? How do you hire them? How do you onboard them? How do you coach them? And even at times when you need to move them out of that position, how do you do that in an ethical and in a biblical way? So I'm going to introduce you to the people that are here, and we're going to start in the upper left-hand corner with Kelly Simon. So Kelly, tell us about yourself. And I know with all 3 of you, none of you probably grew up and say, when I grow up, I want to be an HR expert. So Kelly, tell me real briefly about your journey, about where you've been and currently what you're doing.
Sure. Well, I'm so happy to be here today with you all. I started out in human resources in college. I was actually an intern at the University of Washington at a company that had an opening in human resources. So it kind of fell into my lap. And I started studying HR in school. And so from there, I just really, I graduated and I started out as an HR coordinator and worked my way through various positions in companies. I've worked for small companies and large companies like Accenture and Starbucks. And most recently, I had the opportunity to work in a nonprofit environment for the National Breast Cancer Foundation. So I have both for-profit and nonprofit experience, and I have a passion for people. So I just love helping develop people and make the most out of their potential. I'm now an independent HR consultant and use all the years that I have behind me to really help companies grow and develop systems and processes to maximize performance.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We'll progress down to diagonal to me, and Wes Wada, welcome. And tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey.
Thank you so much. And again, it's a pleasure to be here with all of you as well. So I grew up in Los Angeles, and I came into HR kind of through the side door. So I went to college in Los Angeles. I was a finance major. And my first job was with Atlantic Richfield, Arco, the oil company that you may have seen. And for 10 years, I did all the typical finance types of jobs. And I was actually in Hong Kong on an expat assignment, and it was time for me to come back. And the head of HR and the CFO asked if I would like to take a turn as the compensation director for Arco. And so I was a finance guy, and they're asking me to go to HR, and I was wondering, well, why do you want me to switch over? And so it's the early 90s, and so some of you may or may not be familiar with this, but exec comp was just starting to become controversial. And so that whole exercise really is probably more financial than it is HR. So that's how I transitioned over. I started working in the area, and I really liked it. There's an element of analysis, which isn't too hard if you're a technical type, but the whole people side was just fascinating and very interesting. You get to work with people, and just the combination of the two was very enjoyable. So I stayed in the function. And I've worked with other various multinationals, most recently Kimberly-Clark, the Kleenex and Huggies people. And the Lord started to tug at my heart and moved me in a different direction. And I actually attended Dallas Theological Seminary. And wonderful school. I got an MA degree there. And then eventually I left the secular work world, and I began teaching at Cairn University. I was helping them with their MBA program, helping them to develop an HR master's program. And so I did that for a couple of years, and then the opening came up at DTS for the head of HR. And just very, very blessed to have the opportunity to work and serve here. The people are wonderful, but I am new to the DTS HR function. But again, great people. It's a great place to serve.
Awesome. We love having you here. We love having you here. Well, and then directly below me is Errol Connor. So welcome, Errol, and tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be with you today. I actually was a computer science major out of college, Grambling State University, and I actually left Grambling, went active duty Air Force, and served as a communications officer for several years. And after my service time, I went and actually worked at the Walmart account on their production database for AT&T, and spent some time there and moved on, continuing to work in the database world, worked for Oracle Corporation, and spent quite a bit of time working in that space. Actually was a restaurant owner for a short time. I don't know if I've ever mentioned that to you before, George, but spent a little bit of time as a restaurant owner. And while working for Oracle, the Lord really turned my heart towards ministry. I was in Bible study fellowship for a couple of years, and Lord turned me, and I came to Dallas Seminary with an IT background, and the Lord just continued to work with me. So I worked with a couple of local church plants in the Dallas area, and then became a full-time ministry, worked as full-time as an executive pastor for Christ the Rock Community Church in South Florida, and moved on and came back to Texas in 2013 and came on staff at Concord Church here in Dallas in 2014. And I've been serving here as executive pastor since then.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, and as I've told all of you before we went live with the recording, just a great wealth of diverse backgrounds. And again, really looking forward to this conversation. Well, here's my first question it's about hiring people. And how do you hire good people? And again, in the context of a church or in a parachurch organization, what are some things, words of wisdom you can give us about how do you hire good people?
Well, I can, I'll take a shot at that. I think, a couple of things. I think you want to certainly understand their interests, their background. What is it that they really have passion about? Also understand their giftedness, their skill set, and what is it that God has really wired them to do, so that they're being placed in the right role on the right team. And also what's their capacity? Sometimes someone who is really good with 5 or 10 people may not be as good with 50 or 500. So I think assessing those things and at the same time, understanding what is it, do they really fit the culture of your church or your environment? Because they can have all of the things that I just mentioned, but not be a good fit for your culture and for your environment. So I think that cultural fit is a piece that is extremely important as you look and you vet people who are looking to serve on staff in a higher capacity.
Okay, I'm curious. You used the word assessing, so should we be giving, what types of assessments should we be doing on the front end, if that makes sense? I mean, everybody has a great resume. It all looks great on paper. Are there some assessments we should be doing with them?
Well, yes. So there are a couple that we have that I've used over the years. We use Strength Finders as one tool. Myers-Briggs has been helpful. And there are a number of others that are out there to see what is, what is their, how do they kind of just stack up in terms of all of the giftedness and skill set they have. But those are two that come to mind.
Okay. What about some of the others? What's some suggestions that you have about hiring good employees?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Please go ahead.
I was just going to share, I always recommend hiring for values. So if your organization, has set values that they really live by as an organization, then you hire based on those specific values. So for example, if one of your values is, let's just say respect, then you're going to ask questions through the interview process that get that candidate to talk about, how they actually exhibit respect in the workplace. And so you're talking to the candidates right from the very get-go about the values of your organization, because you're trying to assess if it's a good fit for both of you, right? It's kind of like dating, where you're trying to assess each other. So I love the personality profiles, strengths finders, all of those are awesome. Another one is DISC, that I actually love to use. And at the end of the day, if that person's passion and heart is there, then I think most people are trainable. Most people are, individuals that I would be able to bring on board and really, have successful, have success in the organization. If they're just signing up for a job and it's not their passion or their heart isn't behind it, especially in a nonprofit situation, and if they don't align with the mission, then that's usually a disconnect from my experience.
Yeah. Wes, you were going to say something?
Yeah, just one other addition. I would really suggest having hired people at churches, having some experience now at DTS. Try not to compromise. Sometimes, honestly, the pay is below secular levels. The candidate pools may not be as robust as, again, on the secular side, but try not to compromise. And if the right person doesn't come along, be patient. And I know you've got to hire someone, start having the work being done, but if it's not the right person, really consider just waiting and trying to find that one person who really will either fit culturally or have the right skill sets for the job.
Okay. I know when I am trying to hire somebody, I personally struggle with the interviewing process. I don't know what to ask. Are there like the go-to, it's like one thing you said, Kelly, ask questions that about assessing where the person's values are. Are there other like tricks of the trade of here's the great question to ask, or here's the types of questions to ask, or even maybe here's a resource that has great interviewing questions?
Yeah, that's a great question. The trend in interviews right now, and it has been for quite some time, are behavioral interviews questions. And so it's tell me about a time when you faced a difficult scenario in the workplace. Maybe there was harassment that was involved, or maybe there was theft, or what was a scenario that you were maybe exposed to, or that you knew was going on, and how did you handle that? Especially for a leadership position, those are critical questions, right? To understand how a candidate would deal with really tough scenarios, because I don't think that the church is, not going to be subjected to the tough stuff either. So really asking the behavioral, tell me about a time when this happened or that happened. Especially any hot topics that you want to make sure are addressed before that candidate would come on board are super important to ask.
Okay, great. Anything else from the other two guys?
Well, I think most of us probably do it, but if you have multiple people interviewing and you ask those kinds of questions, and if you got multiple sets of eyes and ears listening, and you compare notes, it usually comes out. Okay. Is the person a cultural fit? Do you see any watch-outs that are starting to pop up? And if everyone's seeing the same thing, that's a good indicator.
Okay, good.
George, you asked for a resource. There is an organization called the Society for Human Resources Management. It is a resource for HR professionals, and it's actually a global organization, and they have free downloads. So anyone can go on and search, interview questions, and they have so many templates and great resources available. And you can also become a member if you want special access to certain, forms and documents that they have. And that's a great tool and resource for people that are looking for help.
Fantastic. Thank you. Errol, you were going to say something.
Yes, I was going to add that it's good to have a list of questions, because sometimes you may have, as an interviewer, someone who is not used to interviewing. So what you don't want to do is ask questions that are against the law to ask. And so
such as, what's against the law to ask?
Well, do you have family? How old are you? Where are you from?
Yes.
Just to name a few.
All the things I've probably broken the law with many
That's
times.
okay. Now you know. Oh.
So if there's a panel or more than one person, again, if you're not used to interviewing, you want to make sure you have a good set of questions to keep you out of court.
Okay, that's a good thing to know. That's a good thing to know. Well, I know before we logged in live to record, we were talking about job descriptions. And, hopefully we have a job description that is in front of us as we're doing the interviewing process. But Errol, I want to follow up with you because you had brought this up of the importance of job description. So especially in a church context, talk to us a little bit about how to have job descriptions that actually work.
Well, so I think it's a good practice, especially if you're in a church plant or a smaller church just starting out, and you may not have a lot of good descriptions. You want to write a good job description that, in most cases, the same description is the same description for a volunteer could translate well for an employee. You may have to change a few things, but with a good job description that details what are you looking for, what the requirements of the job is, what are the requirements, what are the expectations, all of those things clearly listed out on paper can be very helpful, especially as you move along and things may change. You want to always be able to visit and go back to the description that you put in place for different positions.
Okay, great. And I know we provide this for the students as well. This is going to be in the download section where we bring templates for job descriptions that students in this class are going to be able to look at. Well, let's say, so we've done a good job in hiring this person, and we've selected the person, we've given them a job description. One of the next steps is onboarding them, of getting them acclimated to the church, to the ministry, to the nonprofit. What are some best practices of onboarding new employees?
I love this topic. This is one of my favorites because I think it can really help, make or break someone's experience as they get used to your company and the culture. So I have a couple of things I always recommend. The very first thing that I ever do when I hire an employee or I coach a manager to do for their employee is to create a map. And it's a 30, 60, 90 roadmap for that new hire. It's everything from logistics as far as did you order business cards? Did you get them set up on email? Who's going to greet them the first day? Who's going to take them on a tour of the office? Who is going to take them to lunch? All those logistics that create an experience. In the corporate world, we call that employer branding too. It starts from the interview process and it goes until the employee leaves that company, right? It's the employer brand that we're trying to market to, attract the best candidates and also retain them. And so onboarding is a way that you can really set that stage early on. And so through that 30, 60, 90 day map, it gives a candidate a clear plan. When they come on board, they know exactly what's expected of them. There's no, unknowns that they're going to experience, really. I always recommend having a mentor that partners up with them so they can be kind of their buddy, whether they're, on campus with them or virtual, at the office, whatever, that they have a resource that they can go to besides their manager. Besides someone on their team, that usually that's the ideal, so that they can reach out and just say, hey, this is a question I have, or how do I find the restroom, or how do I, ship something, or all those things, right? And really it's just to make sure that they understand, that they're welcome, that they're part of the team, and to set them up for success. The job description is huge. So let's go back to that for just a second. Because I think once people start, I always tell them, you tell me what you think the job description might need to be, how it might need to be different. Because we might think we know on paper what that job should look like, but if you get a right candidate in there, they're going to be smart and savvy and hopefully even make that job better. And so how do you improve the job description and make it even more accurate based on what that person is doing? So at Starbucks, for example, I'll give you guys what we did for onboarding. It was 60 days of just relationship building. So it was a luxury. I understand that, right? Not every company has that luxury. But that was ideal because it allowed me the opportunity as a new hire to understand the business, first and foremost, understand who I was going to be working with, build trust and rapport. And once I had that 60 days under my belt, I knew exactly who to go to, who I needed to influence, who I needed to be working with. And so it just really helped set me up for success, and the whole organization was behind that. So that's my 2 cents on onboarding.
Awesome. Awesome. And Wes, I know we've talked about this, about DTS, and like, what are some of your ideas that you're hoping to implement it? I mean, this is a case study exactly of what are some things you hope to implement here at DTS with this?
Yeah, really all of those things. And, the one thing I'd probably add, having worked at a lot of different places, all with good intentions, you really have to focus and put effort and be intentional on creating a good onboarding experience. So when you start to work on it and you start to put the pieces together, you kind of heard there are a lot of different people. There are a lot of areas that are involved. So you've got to work with IT, lots of different groups within HR, the people who have jurisdiction over ID cards, all of those pieces. And it takes someone or a group of people to put some effort in and think about what experience you do want to create for that new person starting. And it's all of those things, but just putting that roadmap together as was described, and really making sure it all kind of comes together. So I'll give you one example. My last company really wanted to improve its onboarding experience. So we've all been there. The laptop shows up maybe 4 or 5 days after you start. Where my phone's not quite working right. My email's not set up till the 3rd day, things like that, right? So they really wanted to try and improve all of that. So they actually dedicated one person to try and fix it all. Now, it was a large corporation, but it took 1 year.
Wow.
To work through getting employee ID numbers set up, getting them in the system, working with IT. So I see a lot of nodding heads, but it's just that kind of effort. But it really is worth it, because that first day experience can really set the tone for the employee being very happy, very productive with the company.
Awesome. Yeah, I've been there, done that. I've been the new employee and have experienced the lostness of, okay, who am I supposed to reach out to? How's the game played here? Those types of things. So thanks for sharing that. I want to turn to the subject a little bit now that this employee is working for the organization, of evaluations. Do you do these on a yearly basis, on a quarterly basis? Is this a formalized process of a long form of how do you do yearly evaluations? And I know some of the trend is even changing in how you evaluate your employees, but especially in a church, nonprofit, parachurch organization, how would you recommend us doing that?
Well, I think there are a couple of ways that work well. One, in our environment, we provide a mid-year assessment and then an end of year. Mid-year is good. That's kind of halftime. That can kind of help you kind of see where a person is, where people are within a certain role. We used to have that whole process on Excel spreadsheets. And we graduated from Excel, and now we have a cloud-based system that is very helpful, that keeps track of everything, and that system can help you, and it scales with you, right? If you're small or in a church plant starting out, and you say, "Well, I can't afford," well, sometimes there are solutions out there at a lower price point that can scale with you as you grow. That way, you're not starting out in an Excel spreadsheet with a set of questions that have to evolve. The other piece I would add to that is that certainly back to Kelly's point, making sure that the values are part of that review, right? So you're being assessed on what you value, because people tend to lean towards what they what the organization values. So making sure that the values are a part of that appraisal process is important as well.
Awesome.
I agree 100%. And then it's weaved from the interview questions through the job description. It's just part of the culture. When you talk about values all the time, they're remembered more frequently. It's just how the business runs. It's part of the DNA of the organization. I believe that performance management is such a controversial topic. There are so many people that say, get rid of performance reviews altogether, or you need to be doing them once a month. I mean, the verdict is out, right, on what's the most effective. What I will say, whether it is written or not, is just constant feedback. People can't really get enough feedback. Constructive criticism, being honest and direct, is going to get you a long way instead of being passive aggressive or not dealing with things that are hard. I think a lot of times people just, want to sweep issues under the carpet and not deal with performance, issues. But the reality is, if you do need to end up terminating someone, which we'll get to in a second, it's really difficult because you don't have documentation, you haven't counseled that employee previously, and so it can really get you in hot water if you're not directly, hitting these topics head on and sitting down with your employees for difficult situations. You also want to be giving positive reinforcement, right? So on the flip side, you want to nurture your rock star employees. And so many people like myself need that verbal communication where, you're doing a great job. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And so I love performance reviews for a number of reasons. And I think that there are all sorts of different formats and lengths, and you can do them online or on paper. But the biggest point is just to be constantly communicating with your team and your employees.
Yeah. The one thing I'd add, I agree with everything that's been said. And I think performance reviews actually start a step before. You have to be clear on expectations. And that's not easy either. Having those upfront discussions about goals, but really the things that a supervisor would like a staff member to work on. And then just being upfront also that there will be some assessments, but the point of an assessment is, yes, to see how they're doing, but also to help the person. So if they're maybe not doing so well in an area, how can you help them? And so if they kind of know that some help is coming, through a training program or some other mechanism, it's to help them improve and then help them perform better, and then the organization benefits as well. So if you can kind of communicate all that up front, it just sets the right tone as well.
That's perfect. And that's a perfect segue to the next question of how do you coach those underperforming employees? So Wes said one thing's of making training available, offering help, those types of things. What are some other things of, again, there's nothing ethical. This person's not doing something unethical. They're just not performing well, but you see potential in them. So how else do you coach up some of the underperforming employees?
Sometimes it's getting them to connect with their peers at other churches or other organizations who are doing the same thing they're doing, and getting them out of the environment, so to speak. That'll let them connect with their peers, and sometimes that's a great way, a great tool, so they can see how their role functions in other churches, other environments, and sometimes that can help an underperformer to see that hey, there is a different way to do this, and a better way.
Yeah, that's just personally, that's been huge for me. Getting outside the bubble and meeting my counterparts at other places, it really helps open your eyes. So, Kelly, anything you would add to that of how do you coach up?
Yeah. So I always ask questions and listen. I think those are the two best skills that I, daily practice, and also guide managers to practice with their teams, because I think there's a lot of assumptions we make as to why someone's underperforming, and maybe they are, but maybe they have a personal issue going on at home that's getting in the way of their performance. Maybe they're just flat out unhappy with their job, and they need to be able to come out and say that to you. And so if you prompt that and say, help me understand, we're hitting some roadblocks here, you're not performing. Let's talk about that. What's getting in the way? Is there something I could do? as your leader? Are you not getting enough support from me or communication? Are you not getting enough training? Where's the gap? Is there something going on, that you need to, talk to me about or whatever? Sometimes people aren't going to share, but oftentimes the tears will flow and they'll talk about how they might be unhappy. They might have something going on in their personal life. And so I think we have to also understand with HR that we have to keep the heart in human resources and not just look at it as a progressive discipline issue or a document that we need to create, but there's a heart behind each person. And so we have to help them uncover, why aren't they performing? Mm-hmm. And maybe that means they need to, transition to a different job or even outside of the organization, and that's okay. And to really foster that dialogue with someone.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, let's kind of go to the opposite extreme.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, so I think, and you teach this at the seminary, I think sharing your story and having them share their story can build relationship, can build trust.
Yeah.
So that when these tough times come, it's a little bit easier to have that dialogue with someone that may be underperforming.
Yeah. There's always a story. In my role here now, there's always a story, and it's very easy to jump to conclusions without hearing the story. Well, I want to go to the opposite extreme of, we've talked about hiring and onboarding the employee. Let's talk about swinging the pendulum the opposite direction of when it's time to terminate the employee. And I want to talk about this. I'm going to throw out both questions, and we can tackle both of these simultaneously. Are there just some things that are an immediate fireable offense? This happens, you're shown the door, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. That's one conversation. The other conversation is, you coached this person, you have tried to use performance reviews, you've done these things, but you have just now reached a point where this doesn't need to continue on any further. So talk to me about, how do you fire people? Both what's immediate fireable, no questions asked, and then the other thing of, how do you fire people in a godly way, in an ethical way?
Who wants to go first?
There's stunned silence on that one. This is a hard topic. I struggle with this. I've never fired a person, and I should have, and I never have. So Kelly, go ahead.
Unfortunately, I have substantial experience with this topic. I worked in the .com when the .com boom was happening in Seattle, and then it crashed, right? So we had severe layoffs and lots of transitioning, of employees and things like that. To answer your first question, what is severe enough, to warrant immediate termination? Things like grand theft, right? Like if someone is on the accounting team and you find that they've been embezzling funds, sorry, that's immediate. If there is a severe sexual harassment type of situation going on, that generally warrants immediate termination. Inappropriate relations between a manager and an employee. Dealing with a vendor in an inappropriate manner, like just anything that's in an employee handbook, essentially, that is severe and pervasive enough to warrant an immediate termination. Those are some types of things. It could be anger. There's a lot of anger management that goes on in the workplace. So it could be, something that is severe enough that warrants an immediate termination.
Okay.
I would certainly echo Kelly's list of immediately fireable offenses, and I would also say, you say, how do you ethically fire an employee? I would say don't make it a surprise to them. They should not be leaving and wondering, well, what happened and where did this come from? If you're going to let someone go, they probably should be able to tell you, okay, I think it's time for me to move on, because you have let them know, hey, this isn't, we're going to need to work on some things. This isn't working out. And if you are coaching them along the way, you're having consistent meetings with them, they know they're underperforming, it should not be a surprise. And as much as possible, you want to leave the person whole. you want them to be able to still, in some cases, they may still want to be a part of your church. Because you're, especially in the church space, you're dealing with that kind of that dual, I'm a member and I'm also on staff. So, and then if you're the senior pastor, if possible, you want a buffer. You don't want to be the senior pastor firing or letting employees go, because in many cases, you then lose the right to shepherd them to be their pastor. But if it's human resources or some other person in the organization that is actually doing the terminating, then in many cases, that still allows the pastor to be the pastor.
Okay, that's a good suggestion. Wes, anything you would add to that?
No, I think they've covered both ends very well. So I agree with the list of immediately fireable offenses, and completely agree with just that kind of ongoing discussion. So it shouldn't be a surprise. And if you've set it up and had those discussions, and people kind of know what the expectations are, and they kind of know, right? Are they meeting it, not meeting it, and what those issues are? That's the right way to do it.
Okay.
George, I have a couple, I have a few more things to add real quick. So,
no, go for it.
I always, in the back of my mind, and for my HR teams who are dealing with these separations, it's always about respect and dignity. Those are the two words that always are core of any elimination. We want to respect that person, even if they did the most egregious offense, right? We respect them on their way out. So that means walking them out with respect and dignity, thinking through those things, like having boxes ready to go if it's an immediate transaction and you need to let them go that day. It's literally walking through how that's going to look and feel for that person, and making sure that it's done in a respectful way. Even if they are, the worst offender, that you treat them with respect and love in that situation. The other thing is to document everything. So it shouldn't be a surprise. I totally echo what everybody else has said. And the best way to do that is to document. So if it were to ever get to a situation where, it's in the court's case, then you as the professional have documented everything, and you're protecting your organization at the same time, in case, it's sent to trial, and that employee decides to take it against you. So,
okay.
Yeah.
One question students will ask me sometimes is they always hear the term severance package. Mm-hmm. When do you do that? When do you not do that? And again, church, nonprofit, parachurch world, what does that look like?
I can speak mostly from, the corporate side, also from the nonprofit world. Typically, when we would give out a severance type of situation, it would be if, we felt that there was just not a good solution for that employee long term, and we wanted to make it right and really, again, with respect and dignity, help them leave with some funds to help them transition to the next job. So they would sign a separation agreement, basically stating that, in exchange for the financial sum that they might get, and it might be based on their years of service, their title, their level, things like that, then they would receive separation, funds, basically. The situations where they usually wouldn't receive such agreement would be, the severe cases we talked about, where there was egregious behavior, or they definitely had issues that were not fixable, to say the least.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and I would just add, so having seen both the secular and nonprofit approaches to severance, I think for the person learning HR, it's good to understand what the purpose of severance is. It really is an amount of money that's designed to try and help a person transition to the next job. And so the other issue really is affordability. Mm-hmm. In the for-profit world, you see some fairly generous severance packages, but they can afford it. Mm-hmm. In the nonprofit world, and maybe if I can say it, moving into the church world, affordability becomes more difficult.
Yeah.
And an issue. And so it's a practical consideration. So do you want to provide some ability to transition? Can you afford to do it? All the things that Kelly mentioned are absolutely correct, but you overlay those couple of concepts, and then you can decide what kind of program you want. The ones I've seen on the nonprofit and church side are relatively modest, compared to the secular world,
Right.
but it really probably is what's the right situation and what can we afford.
Okay, good, good. Well, if you've noticed on the screen, I intentionally picked people who didn't look like me because I wanted to get a diversity. This is kind of like the UN happening right here. And kind of as the final thing, what I would love to hear is I'd love to hear from each of you. And Kelly, I will start with you. We work in mixed gender environments, and even what's happening now in the church and the Christian nonprofit world is now starting to reflect more what has already been a reality, of course, in the corporate world.
Mhm.
Not that you're representing all of womanhood, but just what would be a words of wisdom for guys who are working with women in the work environment in the context of leadership development?
Yeah, I think the more training that you can do on, just helping each other understand, not just even from a gender perspective, but doing things like the DISC training that we were talking about, right? Like, why am I wired the way I'm wired? Part of it might be because I'm a female, but part of it is because it's how God designed me, right? And it's my inherent talents and personality is wired very differently than someone else on my team who is a woman, and so I think it's understanding just the differences in how we're truly, how our brain is thinking, and so to be respectful of that and to understand everybody's different, right? Like, just because I'm a woman doesn't mean that I'm going to be emotional necessarily, right? So kind of taking away those stereotypes. And really giving people the benefit of the doubt to not jump to conclusions, really, when it comes to maybe some of the general stereotypes about females. And again, it goes back to that respect and dignity we talked about. So, and it goes vice versa, right? Like, as a woman, I am practicing that in my mind all the time with how I am treating people in the workplace, regardless if they're a female or a male.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Thanks. Well, and then I have an Asian American and an African American. Dallas Seminary is absolutely the most diverse environment I've ever worked in, and it is fun, and I love it. But there's challenges with that as well. So just, again, not that you're representing an entire people group, but what would be words of wisdom of working in a very multi-ethnic environment?
So coming back to Dallas from South Florida, South Florida is one of the melting pots of America. In the church I was at there, we probably had 60 different ethnicities within the church. I think there are 118 ethnic communities in South Florida. So very, very diverse, and one thing that I learned there is not to be, in some cases you can't be as dogmatic. I mean, you can have strong opinion about things, but you have to be a lot more flexible. You have people coming out of all kinds of backgrounds. In South Florida, you have people coming out of Catholicism. So they, you have to deal with just a lot of different backgrounds and preferences sometimes, that we have to go easy on, because depending on where a person was, born and how they grew up, they may not value some of the things you value. And it's not because they are sinful, what they value, is just that they just had a different background and they prefer things that are much different. So just being a lot more flexible on things that you may want to be dogmatic on. Even theologically, sometimes you have to talk through your theology in a way that is pliable and flexible in terms of helping others from other ethnicities kind of understand why you take such a position on a certain text, even, because there's just so much variety there.
Awesome. Yeah. And Wes, what would you add to that?
So I echo everything that's been said. And so I grew up in Los Angeles, so another very diverse culture. My high school, I think, had an equal mix of just about every ethnic background. So it was a wonderful environment to grow up in. So you do get to see all the different perspectives, and it's a big learning experience. One of the things that really helped me, I was on the expat assignment in Asia, and one of the longtime expats gave me this little bit of advice, and I thought, this is great, and I think maybe has a little applicability here. He said, you're going to go to lots of different countries, you're going to do business and talk to all these different peoples. And he said, just remember, their objectives are probably all the same, but their ground rules are different.
Mm-hmm.
And that was very helpful, just to kind of keep it in the back of your mind as you go to different countries, work with different people, and just understand they have different perspectives. And as Errol said, different backgrounds and different ways of seeing things, but everyone's probably kind of going in that same direction. Mm-hmm. If you keep that in mind, it's very, very helpful. And this is just a personal approach. So with everything, George, you've said, and everyone else has said, these days, with the environment that we're in, the word respect has been said a lot, and I completely agree. And then I'll just add, maybe it's a little old-fashioned, but respect and good manners to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
You can still be positive. You can still project positive attitudes, try to have fun, but you really have to be mindful of, what is fun to you may not be fun to someone else too. So,
right.
Just being open and not making assumptions. Mm-hmm. But, these days I do just try to stay in the middle of the road and be respectful, use good manners, and just try to have that open mind and just, not make assumptions about people.
Awesome. Well, that's a great point to end on. Thank you so much for participating in this. And class, I hope that you have enjoyed this as well. Some of the resources they've been talking about, we're going to have in the files section. And as you have questions or you have more conversations about that you want to dialogue with myself or with your TA, or even we'll put you in connection with one of these people if that's something you want to do as well. But thank you very much for watching.